Order. Welcome everyone to the January 8, 2024 City of Kalispell's work session. Two items for discussion this evening. The first item is the State and Local Infrastructure Partnership Act of 2023, which is House Bill 355 projects. Mr. Russell, do you have an intro on that?
Yeah, Mayor and Council. So I've spoken a little bit about this before, but in the last legislative session, House Bill 355 allocated about $20 million for infrastructure maintenance and repair. And it went through numerous deviations as it went through the legislative process. Initially, it was all going to be allocated to counties, and then counties would allocate it out through an application process. So I bring that up simply because we're going to have to talk about the process as it moves forward and where we're at. That legislation changed at some point through it, and we identified that the city of Kalispell would receive about $313,000. We have to match that with 25% of the total cost. And it can be used for, a wide variety of different repair and maintenance programs within the city. Listed those out in the memo and just briefly run down them. Drinking water systems, wastewater, fire suppression systems, if it's independent from drinking water, streets, roads, bridges, landfills, streetlights, airports, public grounds, and buildings. So through the new regulation with it, the first step is and it's accepting of applications. And again, that's just holdover language when it was the county that was supposed to solicit applications. We've received a direct distribution. Luckily, in their guidance documents, their solicitation of applications could be as simple as a department head meeting to generate project potential and ideas. The next step is to hold a public hearing. And then after the public hearing, it's to establish a priority list. So we're working through that process. We hit the solicitation of applications by the December 31st deadline and really just used our capital improvement plan, or as we'll talk about, the lead and water service line project, one that we know is coming up but is an unfunded mandate. So we're just, like I said, working through that process. So tonight was just kind of a precursor to the public hearing, because I thought it was important just to talk a little more about programming, about potential projects that we had identified that were in our CIP that constituted repair maintenance. And really, some of the unique components of it are, the public grounds and buildings aspect of it. But it's one of those ones that, we do want to take legislative intent, I think, as a wise approach to it, to identify, spending that is of the highest benefit to the taxpayers. So projects that we had identified that are eligible, and again, any of our infrastructure projects are eligible as long as they're replacement maintenance ones. But some that, are a little bit more appropriate, kind of the smaller project that are really in line anyway. And I'll just go down the list. Then we'll go a little bit deeper into the lead and service line replacement, because it gets a little messy on that one. I mean, that's a great project for this because it's an unfunded mandate. We have not adjusted rates to account for it. However, where we're right now is a little bit messy, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But, going down the line, that's one of the potential projects. And that has actually two phases that will come into play. One is the identification of the inventory that we've already started, but may need some assistance. The second is the actual replacement. And like I say, we'll talk a little bit more about that, because we probably actually should have a policy and a program for that replacement, since we're actually dealing with customer-owned service lines, not part of the city's infrastructure. Yet the mandate falls on the city for that requirement of the lead and service rule that we anticipate. So anyway, we'll get to that a little bit more in just a minute. The other one, we're going down the list, 9th Street, drainage, street slope repair project. Again, that has an estimated cost of $633,000. Have the description of it there. Again, just a standard maintenance and repair. Meridian Court drainage and street repair project. Again, reconstruct 1.5 blocks of Meridian Court, improve the street drainage system. That has an estimated total cost of $453,000. Sewer main slip lining repair project, estimated at $750,000. Again, talking about repair of about 7,000 linear feet of deteriorated line through our slip lining process. Then a couple others that deal with more the public grounds. And these are interesting because these are ones that would actually impact the general fund budget. And so we wanted to throw a couple of those on there for discussion, things that have been identified that need repaired and replaced, but at a little bit of a higher cost, and then again are outside of a dedicated funding source. So the Lions Park playground equipment replacement, we're estimating that'd be about $170,000, and boiler replacement at the public safety building, looking at about a $60,000 replacement through there. So again, next steps we'll have is a public hearing. We'll probably do at the next meeting a resolution of intent for a public hearing, then hold the public hearing, then prioritize the different projects, and then submit applications. So even though we have a direct allocation, we still have to submit applications, get approved by Department of Commerce before we can actually implement. And I think we have to to the end of 2024, 25 to get projects under contract, all spent by 2027, I think. So the big project on here, like I say, which would work great if we had everything, program in place, the whole parameters of, how you deal with the private sewer line or private water line going on with the custom things. Just some questions to be hit. So as we look at it, and Susie has a presentation on this one, it's only one of these projects that we have actual presentation on, though happy to answer questions on any of them. We'll have to go through the service line replacement for this. And like I say, I think we can divide it up into two projects, one being finishing up the inventory, which we may just need some assistance on. She can talk about what we've done up to this point, where we need to be, and like I say, there may be an avenue for using a portion of these funds to finish out the inventory, which we may need help on. And then the second would be the actual replacement. That may just be later on through a whole different program project that we have. So Susie, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you to walk through the whole lead service line rule that we anticipate, timelines, and kind of the process.
Thank you, Doug. Good evening, Your Honor and council members. I don't know if you recall, but last December, we were in a work session where we reviewed the lead rule and improvements. So I'm just going to do a real quick refresher on that and then give a status of where we're at and what's to come in the near future as a part of that. So if you recall, the rule aims to essentially remove lead from the public water supply portions of it. So the goal from EPA was to get the lead out of the schools. The second goal was to get the lead out of the drinking water, and that's where it really affects our system. And then the third goal is to empower communities by communication, which will actually affect us later on because we are going to have to provide some different types of communication to our public due to from the outcomes of this process. So the lead rule was actually published in 2021. However, it hasn't been officially implemented. What we do know that is by October 16th of 2024, we are required to have an inventory of the material types of our service lines. So we do have a deadline, and we know that that is a compliance trigger date that we have to be able to provide an inventory, and we have just under 10,000 service lines that we know of for the city of Kalispell. So it's a pretty big task for us to complete by the end of this year. Once we've completed that inventory, then we're going to need to come up with a replacement plan for those. And then also, we're gonna have to come up with a new sampling plan because we'll know where our lead service lines are, where the lead is in our system. So we'll have to come up with a new sampling plan, and there's also new, more stringent trigger levels that are placed on all public water supplies when it comes to lead as a part of that. So what we know is we have to get an inventory done by October. What we don't know is what is the requirements for replacing those lead service lines that are identified, or those unknown lines that are identified, and the timeline to get them replaced. We don't really have a direction on that yet. We were supposed to get direction from EPA on that last year, and it just hasn't been forthcoming. So when EPA decides that they feel confident in providing that information, we will get that and we'll move forward accordingly. So what we have been focusing on is our inventory of our system. If you can imagine, 10,000 data lines is pretty extensive. And so what we've done is we've taken all of our optimal tools and put that together. We're collecting all of our curb stop locations. We needed a database, if you will, to be able to store all this information. So, and we did that by integrating GIS with our databases. So, kudos to our GIS specialist. She's been fabulous in helping us support this effort as a part of that. So, and kudos to our crews, because they're actually going out and they're collecting those GIS locations for 10,000 curb stops in the city of Kalispell. And they've been collecting curb stops now since we discussed this last winter. To date, we've collected just over 8,000 curb stop locations. My data, I apologize, my data on the screen's a little bit old. I put this together last week, and they've done significant amount of work in the last week. So we've collected just over 8,000 curb stop locations, which gives us around 1,000 left to go. So we're getting all that information into our database. And if you were to look in our GIS database and it's coordinated with CityWorks, you can see that this is the information that's going in. If we were to click on a line type, a service line type, we know potentially around when that service line went in, but you can see the blank areas right there. We need to categorize the upstream and downstream service line materials of a curb stop. And we have to know what that is from the main to the house. So it doesn't stop at the right of way for us. It's actually the entire service line. And that's the rule requirement that we have to do that. And then to further that, we have to qualify that the information that we're going to give EPA is correct. So we have to show why we know this line is copper, lead, galvanized. So we don't get to just say we think these are all galvanized lines. We have to prove it, if you will, for that as we submit the information. So we've been out collecting actual curb stop locations, but as a part of that, there's just kind of another zoomed in location on that. Actually, maybe before I go on to the next one, like I said, we've collected about a little over 8,000 curb stops, and we got about, I can't read that, probably 10% left to go on that process. As we've been collecting these over this last year, we know in some areas what the service lines material types are, just because of our other work that we're doing in the system. So we've been backfilling our information when we're out changing out meters in people's home. We now have our meter operators identify what the service line types are, and then we've been collecting that. And so we're slowly populating our 10,000 data points as a part of that. So through our meter changeouts, we're going to, we've got a collection of information within our city works of work we've done on service lines. We have to do a desktop analysis. So we'll start populating that data. We know that all houses that were constructed after 1988, because lead was banned after 88, all of those are not going to have lead service lines, so we can categorize them. So again, we're just going to take us a little while to kind of go through all this process. We plan on sending out a survey to residents in the areas where we know we don't have other informations. And for the city of Kalispell, a lot of that is in the downtown areas. It's the downtown older areas where we just don't have the as-built to show what type of service line materials are out there. So we're going to send out a survey to those areas, and hopefully we'll have the residents fill out. They can go online and they'll fill out a quick little survey to help us identify what type of material it is, send that in to us, and then we're going to populate our database. So we're working on handouts to sending this out here within the next month as a part of that. So what we know to date, if you were to ask me kind of where we're at as far as categorizing what type of material service lines are, we have, let's see, upstream. So of the, at the time that I put this data together, of the 7,663 curb stops that we've collected, we have 2,090 unknown materials from the curb stop to the main. We just don't know what it is. But again, we still have a little bit. We can check the boxes on some of these. And then as far as downstream of the curb stops, we've got a little over 2,200 that we don't know downstream of the curb stop going into the house too. So a lot of work left to do as a part of inventorying. We have methods and processes to start filling in those gaps, but again, we still got a lot of work to do as a part of that. I'll make sure. Yep. Okay. So after we get through the desktop inventory process, then what we'll have a list of unknowns, if you will, out there of these are unknown service material types. So then our next phase is to actually excavate. So we will have to go in and get eyes on the material. So that's kind of the next step that depending on, let's say we have 2,000 service lines that we have no idea what the material is, then we have to go excavate. And again, we have to show upstream and downstream. So if we know what the service line material is from the curb stop to the house, we still have to prove what it is from the curb stop to the main. So unless we feel 100% confident what that material line type is, we can't check that box. We're going to have to go in and excavate.
Susie?
Yep.
You're saying there could be possibly 2,000 that you don't know what it is, and you'll have to dig them up?
Potentially. That's the messy part. Yeah. The 2,000 at this second is hypothetical. I don't.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
Even if it's 1,000.
Yeah. It's gonna.
Wow.
It's pretty extensive, and and some of those excavations are going to be simple, right? We can take our vac truck and we can hydro excavate in the boulevard, but if the service line is coming in and it's underneath a driveway, we got to rip up a driveway.
Right,
to
yeah,
figure
That's my
Got
property.
to go in the road.
Right?
We got to go in the road and dig a hole in the road, but then we still have to go upstream of the curb stop too to verify it. So there's all kinds of different types of scenarios that we'll probably enter into as we get to this point. The other difficult part is we're going on private property outside of the right of way. we have to go in and we have to work with property owners to get permission to excavate in their yards. To verify.
It isn't
work.
happening.
$5,000.
So if,
On those instances, we're gonna try our hardest to not have to excavate on private property. If we can go in a house and we can identify what the pipe type is as it's coming into the house, that's good enough. So we're gonna try to go through all those efforts and not have to go dig on private property, but odds are we're gonna have to do some as a part of that, so.
and if a private owner says, no, I don't want you digging my property up, what's that avenue?
So the best direction we've gotten from DEQ on that is, the rule doesn't speak to you not being able to not classify what the service line is.
Okay.
So I think we would come back and we would have to eventually that section of service line would then get classified as an unknown, right? We couldn't get in there. It's an unknown. So unknowns, as you go through the process, unknowns are automatically by default classified as a lead service line. So it would be triggered for complete replacement. So then we would come back and have another conversation on how the city would require that to get
And that goes all the way to the house?
all the way to the house. Yeah. So main to the house.
And yeah.
So initially, we didn't even, the city didn't put those lines in. That was whoever constructed the house, right?
Yeah.
But now it's on us to go identify and or replace.
Yep. That is a part of this of the lead improvement rule. Yes.
That seems to.
So it's not our responsibility necessarily to pay for it. The council could put that cost entirely on the property owner.
Oh,
So I mean, that's like when I say it gets messy, here's where it gets messy.
Well, it's even messy before that with private property rights, right? I mean.
Well, and correct me if I'm wrong, Susie, if it's part of our utility system, we do have authority to enter
We
for the maintenance
do.
and repair.
Yep.
It's not something we take lightly. And it, again, not to overuse the term, but it's messy.
Yeah, I could see it being an interesting court case, right?
We would win.
And you
This
know,
is just so much fun watching Sid squirm.
our staff, we'll work with the homeowners and do the best we can. If you know, worst case scenario, there may be a few residents that might be wholly against us doing this process, and you know, we'll work with them. We communicate, we provide, you know, we communicate, we educate, we go through the process.
Susie, I'm just curious, like, how have you determined so far which ones are and are not? What are the detection methods? I mean, is it just direct visualization or?
A lot of it is, yes. It's just experience and institutional knowledge of our water system. Joe Schrader, our utility superintendent, you know, we've worked with the system for so long. We've repaired service lines, so we know we've been into areas where we've replaced service lines to a meter pit. So that is categorized already, and that's part of our City Works work order system. We know that Silverbrook is all poly, right? So all new development that's happened,
Yeah.
all that is already inventoried. We just got to get it into the database and start populating it. So we know all that. So that's low hanging fruit. That's easier stuff. The more difficult and challenging areas are the older areas of town. Northridge was a different public water supply. And so that one is challenging.
What
just
neighborhood was that?
in itself, just because it was just built to different standards. The curb stops are located really close to the houses.
No
They have
standards.
one service line that's split to a T. It's a challenging area. South Meadows also. There was just different standards of construction standards from the 50s through 2023 that we have to work through to help inventory and collect data on, so.
So like when you guys were redoing, what was it, 8th this
Yeah.
last summer? You guys were like inventorying.
Oh, yeah,
I bet you were.
yeah, yep.
Okay.
And you know, when we replaced the water main on 4th Avenue East, we know all of those service lines from the main to the meter pits, those are all poly. Now, do we know what they are from the meter pits to the house? Potentially, right? At the time, we didn't know we had to inventory a service line, so we're gonna go back and look at pictures and see what we can get proof on what those service lines are. And then we're gonna try, you know, we're gonna go in houses and we'll try to get information. Like I said, we'll do our best to get the easiest, optimize our tools that we have and try to minimize the excavations that we have to do. I just don't know exactly what that number is gonna be for us.
So just real quick, maybe you answered this already, but with the image you showed, if you can see the service line as it comes into the house and you identify what that type is,
Yep.
does that give you the confidence that that is the same material for the line all the way out to the street, or it can be different anywhere along that line?
All the way to the curb stop. So we would have to prove why we would think it went all the way to the main with that same material type. And we might be able to, just based off of as-built construction material. So, like I said, we will try to go through and categorize things based on our institutional knowledge, construction types, year that the service lines went in. So we're going to use everything we can to minimize the amount of excavations we have to do. But it only really, what we identify in a house only really gives us the line type to the curb stops. And then we have to figure from the curb stops to the main, because they broke it into sections.
And just anticipating kind of just our reaction, obviously, to this. I mean, yeah, that number of 5,000 per excavation, 2,000, I mean, that's incredible. As we talk about this, just keeping in mind the impact to society and individuals of high lead levels with kids and stuff, and making sure that's forefront in the discussion as well, as to why it is this rule is here, why we're doing it, so that we're always balancing that with the burden, which is obviously quite enormous for the city.
Susie, what's polypipe, right?
Yeah.
What's polypipe made from? It's a byproduct of what?
Oil.
Oil. Oh, got it. Sorry. Just one of those things. Mr.
So I
Miller?
just got one, I want to clarify. We're talking, this is from the water main to the alternate water meter location. We do not have to worry about premise piping
Within the house.
within the house.
Faucets and that sort of.
Correct.
Yeah, pretty much, probably to the water meter. We would identify what the pipe type is coming into the house to the water meter, and then we would classify it that way.
Okay.
So
So if it's an old part of town with potential lead pipes in the wall, that's on the homeowner, not us. That's
Yeah.
out of ours.
Yeah.
Okay.
For now.
Yes, yeah, they haven't ever spoke to, the city wouldn't be responsible for any of the plumbing inside the house. It's simply the service line that would feed the house. Yeah.
It's what I figured. I just wanted to double check with, since we're having this conversation.
4 more years.
Right? Right.
Okay.
You've had lots of x-rays lately.
Okay, so where we're at today is we anticipate we're going to have all the curb stops collected by April, which again just kind of sets that database inventory for us. We're hoping to have the desktop portion completed by April, and that's a pretty big lift for us. Actually, when I talk through it with my staff, it's really dependent on our workload. We just got so much work to do and so much time to get it done, but we're going to try to get a complete inventory, the desktop inventory, done by April. And then from there, we will have a list of unknowns and an idea of the areas that we need to go in and excavate. I was really trying to get April, everything, all the unknowns identified by April, so then we'd have, May through October to go in and excavate after the frost leaves the ground. So we may need some support from a contractor to help us go in and do those to help actually identify what those service lines are. By October, we anticipate we're going to have a list of lead service lines within the city, lead service lines, and potentially a few unknowns in there if we don't get to all of them. And then by that time, we'll be able to move on with what our plan is to replace those lead service lines and what that's going to mean for the city of Kalispell. So as Doug alluded to, we need to go and have discussions on who's going to be responsible to fund the replacement of those lead service.
What if we don't meet that deadline? What happens?
If we don't have all of the service lines inventoried, they're identified as unknown. In DEQ and EPA's mind, it is classified as lead. So we would start developing our replacement plans and sampling plans based off of what we know as of October. But it is dynamic. They are telling us that, let's say, by April of the following year, those unknowns, we figured them to be non-lead lines, then we don't have to go replace them. So, but we, as to the best of my knowledge, unless they make some changes or give us more information, which I'm kind of hoping they do, October is our cutoff date to know if unknowns are classified as lead.
Yeah, so it's about softening the impact of the end result. Obviously, the more that you go and identify, is the less that you're going to have to go and.
Yeah.
And another. Sorry, right now?
I'm good.
Another potential that's important to get the inventory done is, there's still, I need to be careful if I'm actually accurate, so this may be mistaken, but the infrastructure bill, a lot of funding through there. Would not surprise me to see a program to aid in the replacement come through. So definitely you want to have things complete by that initial deadline, just in case there is additional funding that does pop up that we can jump on for those replacement components. Again, still somewhat of an unknown.
So. I don't have a lot else to provide. Kind of, again, our goal is to have a complete list to DEQ by October. We'll try our hardest to fill in all the gaps this summer and to try to identify those unknowns. A lot of that is going to be dependent on my staff's workload. If we have a really busy construction season, I have a 3-man excavation crew. It kind of just takes away from all of our other duties. Even if we had, 250 service lines we needed to go dig up, we still need 3 full months of that. Would be the only thing my excavation crew would be doing. So it's almost impossible, to if we had even 250 for us to get done.
So the 250 you're looking at using just to finish the study, or is that? Doug and I were discussing that. In April, I'll have a really good idea of our number of unknowns. Okay.
That's right. And then from there, if we could use the funding to help us complete the inventory, then I think that would be money well spent in helping us. And as I did not put it in the budget, it's kind of was a unfunded mandate, if you will, and I didn't put that as one of our budget expenditures out of the water fund this year.
So with the cost that you were talking about, the 5,000 per line, that was that?
That was just an estimate. Yeah.
It's an estimate, but was that for identifying the ones that we don't know about. Okay, so what's the estimated cost to go and replace the line to the house?
Yeah, when you,
Yeah,
again, it depends on the scenario, you know, if it's on the short or the long, if we have to dig up a road, if we have to dig up if we have to dig up a driveway, curb, gutter, sidewalk, tree, move trees, bushes. It's really hard. When you look at the EPA studies, they'll tell you it's between $5,000 to $12,000 per line.
what did you say?
5 to 12.
Yeah, and that's based off of EPA's guidance study. But you could pull it. Yeah,
Bore it and pull it.
yeah.
Can you explain in the image, the curb stop versus the alternate curb stop? I apologize. if you
And that
explained
was simply just to give you an idea that not all things are perfect. The curb stops aren't all located in the boulevard in the city of Kalispell. Some of them are up against the house. Some of them are in the sidewalk. Some of them are in the driveway. Some of them are in the boulevard. Some of them are in the road. So they're just alternate locations that curb stops could be.
But there'd only be one curb stop.
There is typically, there should only be one curb stop.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So a little bit of a, peek behind the curtain of the sausage making process that goes through some of our capital improvement projects. This is early on in there, but it's one that, again, may be ripe for the use of SLIPA funds. That's their acronym for House Bill 355. So we wanted to have that as part of the discussion. And again, we don't have to make any decisions tonight because we can't by their program rules. We have to have the public hearing. Then we make a prioritization list and submit our prioritization list. So, if this is like top priority, maybe we put a secondary project. And if we have funds left over, it goes into that secondary project. If we don't use it all for excavation, I think that's an available use, but I'd have to further check into that.
Yeah, I just wanted to add just one other item for the list of potentials for the public hearing would be sidewalk repairs as an option. If they're looking at 25% match, we have our match program anyways to fill this in, bring this in for those sidewalks that maybe we wouldn't. I mean, I can think of some where the property owner's never gonna match, the repair. So
Yeah, and that might be a possibility. They didn't specifically list out sidewalks, and I can tell you our legislature has been anti-sidewalk, and specifically in some of the.
well, they do. They mention street.
Yeah,
I
I
would
know, but
consider
they've also
sidewalk street.
they've also identified in the latest gas tax, well, never supposed to be used for sidewalks. It had to be an argument related to that. So it's a potential and a possibility.
Just need clarification.
Yeah, on that. Like I say, the list I put in here is what's exactly in their handout from Department of Commerce. I just copied it. The eligible uses directly related to it. So
Do they, I mean, other than the gas tax specifically, have they identified any legislation that they do not consider sidewalks part of the street system?
I'd have to look, Councilmember. I just know that they've been heavily resistant on sidewalks and sidewalk-related maintenance repair,
Specifically
which
marked
makes no
above.
sense because the Federal Highway Administration absolutely was all for sidewalks as part of a modal transportation system. So it has not made sense. It's been coming around the last few years at the state.
Ryan, sidewalks are often a bartering chip in the legislature
Okay.
for votes and things like that. Very specific.
So anyway, any other questions on any of the other items we have related to it? Like I said, just wanted to put a few of those items out. Talk about the lead service line, because that's going to be points of discussion throughout the process as we go through there.
Go ahead.
Oh, we don't have slides on the rest of it?
No,
Okay.
a money tree in here
You were
anywhere?
talking about if excavation and that kind of thing has to happen to go find out what a pipe is, which will happen at my house, I'm sure. and probably all my neighbors, because I am Northridge, but how will that work as far as whose responsibility will it be to put it back the way it was? Like, once the driveway's torn up, who's gonna put the driveway back together?
If
Or do
we
not
were to
know
go
that
in
yet?
to excavate to identify the service line type, we would put it back as is. Yeah,
Okay.
it would fall on our shoulders as we would be doing the excavation.
It's more of a money pit situation. You know the movie Money Pit?
No, that question will come up, I'm sure, so.
Yeah, as
thank
far
you.
as the inventory phase, we don't necessarily have a program or a process in place to require the homeowner to pay for that part of it. And the timeline is really short, so it would just be something that we would absorb that cost as a part of our requirements to fulfill the compliance obligations of the public water supply.
Thank you.
What about businesses?
Same.
Same.
Yep.
Any other questions, thoughts?
That's a lot.
Yeah. Well, it's like I say, it's information that's gonna come back, obviously. As we start talking programs, it's just one being, somewhat of that unfunded mandate, and you can see the expenses that we're facing, that, okay, yeah, this is definitely one. Again, we have other projects on there that, are worthwhile talking, but they're in our standard CIP program. But definitely wanted to get this one in front of council as well.
Makes you kind of glad they didn't pass the 1% budget increase.
Well, that's because they didn't go to special session yet.
I know.
Anything else on this one? We good?
We're good.
Okay, the second item, emergency responder levy, public education materials. Mr. Russell.
Let me, probably need to grab the computer cord here.
Okay, about that.
As everyone is aware, we have been spending a significant amount of time in getting ready for the election on March 19th. And starting out our public education with a variety of components. See if I can even pull this up. So what I want to do is just run through, the basics of what we have. We have a committee working on the levy since we had the CPSM reports, going over the different components within there, the recommendations in there. Been meeting really about every week for probably the last couple of months, talking about matters related to the levy and those recommendations. And, went out for the request for proposals for public education to bring in a third-party consultant. That didn't occur. We just took it all in-house. And it's actually been fairly productive because, we established some guiding components of it and really focused on, where the primary messages that can be boiled down into, consistent messaging and in a simplified process, and been able to hit it with, the recommendations from the CPSM reports. Basically boils down to increasing call loads and increasing response times are the two primary messages that really are the foundation of all the materials going out. So with that put together, again, next up is the presentation, and I'll walk through it here today, and then that's going to be the foundation for everything else we do. We do have one video playing right now in theaters because we wanted to take advantage of the holiday time. But that was all built off of the same foundation and same platform, trying to use the same imaging, same messaging. And again, we'll plan on using that for mailers, for advertisements, for everything else. Just build it off that same messaging of, the CPSM reports. So with that tonight, I just wanted to run through the presentation and give kind of that background of it. So it'd be kind of a pseudo PowerPoint presentation I'd give, but
with more explanation of, the purposing behind it. So again, really our overall goal is to get it in front of as many people as we can so they're educated about the issue. As we're looking out into the future, the need's not going to go away. And every year, that it goes on, we're that much further kind of pushing those call volumes, those response times down the line. So primary things is we want people to be educated and we want people to vote, to have a say in what their preference is for service delivery. So that's, again, was the rationale behind, an election in between the November general and the primary in June. So there wasn't anything else tied to it. And people could focus on that one issue, the mail ballot. So it was delivered to everyone's house just to say, hey, the opportunity was there, fill it out, send it back in. Just really want the community to have a say in what they want for the service delivery levels of the emergency response component. So again, that's the primary focus. Some of the things that we've learned in the past, we went out for the election in, I was going to say March of 24, that might be a typo. That's when the election is. The next line down is we went back in 2014, had a historical component of went out for a levy for specific to the EMS program. We had identified the general fund transfer of the impact and the mutual aid calls that were occurring, which, naturally, if you have a mutual aid call, that's a longer response time. So that was the basis behind that 2014 levy. That did fail. So it's not like this is anything new. We've been talking about this for years. Following that 2014, we listened to some of the critiques of it and went out for a dive into service delivery for ambulance because we heard a lot of, well, it should be privatized or it should be a volunteer system or any other type component should be housed within this or within that. So we had Center for Public Safety Management do a dive into service delivery options. Again, they reviewed the whole system and then looked at kind of where we're at, geographic location. But they also are keenly aware of what's going on around the country. And, in reality, that's what we're seeing around the country is private ambulance systems failing. Volunteers declining in volume, and the same struggles that we're having are being held everywhere else. It's just a challenging system with the Medicaid reimbursement program, and not the same dollar amount as it does as it costs to provide the service. So in 2017, they came back and said, really, what the model you have is probably the most efficient and effective for delivering ambulance services. Meanwhile, because we still had a fire service to stand up and deliver, and so incorporating those two together has some scales of efficiency with it. But since then, we've been increasing staffing incrementally when we could, done that as the budget allowed. And one of the interesting things about that is, you can incrementally increase, some of our responders in the fire and ambulance. But it takes a lot of increments to stand up a whole unique apparatus, be it an ambulance or a fire engine, because you have to have the full 24-hour staffing to stand that up. Otherwise, you're just adding people in. And again, we've tried to do that and add in cross-staffing where we could to increase the amount of apparatuses available. But it just requires a full shift to be able to stand up a dedicated ambulance or fire engine. And then knowing, again, the situation that is in, council, as you're well aware, engaged CPSM for an additional review of staffing and operations and to update the data from 2017. Looked at call volumes, response times, compared it back to where it was back in the 2017. And so really the basis for the levy is what was found in those reports and recommendations from 2022. So the initial thing, and as we're looking at law enforcement, the increase in workload. And, obviously thing that points out violent crime, obviously something that really is eye-catching within the initial graph.
as is detective caseload. When you're talking about an increase of 38%, really felony cases that are being shifted over to our existing investigation unit, a very significant increase related to it. The citizen-initiated call is a big deal as well, because not only is it an increase in 22%, but what that also means is those calls not only require the time to go to them, but they take away from the proactive policing. So in reality, you could also call it a 22% decrease in proactive policing, which is a very valuable community policing effort. It's just an extremely effective effort in law enforcement. I mean, numerous times we've talked about here, environmental policing, where you basically try and structure the environment as a deterrent to criminal activity. Same type of thing with proactive policing. You look at places where they're occurring, crimes at, and you basically have a presence there and establish presence or relationships. So the citizen-initiated call volume really is an indicator of not only increased calls within the community, but also a decrease in ability to be proactive in our policing efforts. So naturally, the increase in call volume is a recommendation or a driver of recommendations in the CPSM study, but so is the response time. And again, not everything under response time is within our control. Dispatch is a component of that. We have a special district that does our dispatching. But when you start looking at that national benchmark and the average of 5 minutes and our 9.1, and Kalispell is a large geographic area. It's one of those areas that a lot of rural communities have grown and spread. And we've talked about that in our standards and in a lot of the housing development we've put in place in trying to increase that density component. Well, this is one of those things, and especially if you're looking at, a call that may take, a call with backup, and then you have a call that comes in another part of town, and we have multiple cars on one thing, naturally you're going to have a longer response time. So increasing presence on the streets is a natural way to reduce some of that response time. So those are their two main drivers, again, that we really focused on, workload and response time. So what the levy provides, again, as we're looking at that increase in investigations and detective requirements, this would provide 2 additional detectives to the department and a crime analyst to really do some of that deep review of trends and patterns within criminal activity, again, leading a lot to that proactive policing, but more of a behind-the-scenes proactive effort of being able to identify different trends and different components related to it to, again, help us in the deployment and really the addressing of any type of consistent criminal activity. We incorporate that now as we can. That's one of the reasons why I always say when we get complaints or calls that come in on anything, I say, please call it in so it gets registered, because that helps with the analysis as we go further to then help with trends and patterns. So a lot of people have heard me say, we just need to get those called in and logged into the system. So when we run reports, it comes up, all those calls come up. Additional thing the levy does is it provides 1 to 2 additional officers on the street for every shift. And not only does it do that, but it also frees up our sergeants in there for better administration and management of those different crews within there, because they can step back and be more of a proactive presence as they're managing that respective shift on the call. So again, a lot of times, additional officers is a proactive measure to be able to address not only the increasing call volumes, but the ability to be proactive in some of those different areas as well. So as we shift into the fire and ambulance side, again, looking at those same 2 drivers in terms of call volumes and response time. Again, seeing the same thing, call volumes rising, emergency ambulance calls up 20% over that 5-year study. Emergency fire response calls up 32%. And when you aggregate everything, you're at 23% for total department calls. And that's when it goes back to, and I start talking about the incremental increases. Like I say, we can incrementally increase 1 a year, sometimes 2 a year, sometimes none. And you've heard me for the last couple of years saying, be very selective in adding to
our current personnel because those are ongoing costs, and we'll get to some budget components here in a minute. But if you add one or two, that's great, but you're not adding an ambulance. You're adding personnel. Sometimes that shift may be able to add an apparatus in, but it's just not frequent and steady, not something we can count on. And we look at that, we look at our resources that we currently have, and what we try and do is we try and staff 3 apparatuses at all times. And sometimes it's not done. Sometimes we're at 2. There are times when we're at 4, just depending upon wide variety of things, what we have for full roster, any sick leave, vacation leave, anything of that. So sometimes we're able to add that additional apparatus, but as a general rule, we try and staff 3, including an engine, and always put that those can respond to emergency ambulance calls and do quite frequently. And then 2 ambulances that are fully outfitted for the advanced life support. The interesting component about that is when you start looking at the percentages that each station has multiple calls from those CPSM reports, basically defer that 24% of the time we're facing overlapping calls. And a lot of those times the engine goes out with an ambulance. If it's an advanced life support call, more hands-on scene, the better. When you start talking about a cardiac arrest, a 2-person, even 3-person ambulance, you want more people there on a cardiac arrest call. Or if you're having, an injury accident in downtown, we've all seen the pictures that have happened this year of people running into emergency vehicles on the side of the road. So having that apparatus there as a traffic control measure and as an aid, depending upon the medical call that is there, is also of a benefit. So again, a lot of that time you're already occupied, 24% of the time with our full fleet, depending upon how we're staffing and what those areas are. So if we're occupied at that point, it's normally natural to assume that we do have a call response time arena as well. And again, looking at that national benchmark of 4 minutes, that is time to get on scene with a AED or other cardiac monitor. We use more advanced than just a traditional AED with our monitors on our paramedic staffed units. Just able to provide a lot more information, but it's the same thing. You're looking for 4 minutes for the arrival of one of those units. And again, multiple things going there. Same thing. Dispatch is part of that call component. But again, as you start thinking about, overlapping calls, you may be having mutual aid calls that are coming in or anything else that just takes time. I repeat the story, and I know you've heard me say it. I sat for 40 minutes waiting for a mutual aid to do a transport because the engines don't do a transport. So when I was on a ride along, we went out on a basic life support call, the engine ended up needing to transport, so we had to stay there for care until that mutual aid call arrived. So you're sitting there for 40 minutes. Meanwhile, everything else is going out and being farmed out to mutual aid or when another call drops off. So those are things that come into that response time component. So with the levy and what we're looking at is, adding additional ambulance staffed 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and an additional fire engine staff 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And in reality, and I'll get to this in the next slide, is you're actually looking at either one of the case depending upon the deployment, the calls, the staffing of the day. You may be looking at more ambulances, you may be looking at more fire engines, just depending on our deployment. But also an additional station on the western part of the town where we're seeing all the growth to reduce those or response times out in that geographic area as well. Again, all in line with the CPSM recommendations. Where I talked about, multiple apparatuses, again, just we deploy based upon calls that come in. So the top is just a standard deployment. Changes depending on the number of people on duty that day and what we can hit. But again, we try and fully stand up the 1 fire engine. And then at 62, we have the capacity either to do an engine or 2 ambulances. If that's on one of those days that we have extended, we may cross-staff someone down in Station 61 with an ambulance as a possibility. It just, we try and be as flexible as we can based on the calls that are coming in. And that'd be the same way with the deployment, with the proposed levy. Again, the idea is that we are able to staff 2 fire engines. Again, it's one of those CPSM reports, especially as we're talking about our fire protection rating. They said you got to have another engine available and in reserve and ready to go. In addition to good, safe structure fire attack, ideally you're going to have then 17 people on that first wave. So naturally, that is of a benefit for the initial attack as well. But again, that deployment can change, again, just depending upon the number of people on time. So while we say, yeah, this is to stand up an additional fire truck and staff it and an ambulance, we may actually be getting more just depending upon the staffing for that respective day. So that's really what we're looking at in terms of what the levy provides. Now, some of the questions that we have already received, and we kind of anticipated them, so having this prepared was already good for it. First one is, why do you have to go out for a levy? Isn't the current growth in our taxes not covering the needs that we have? And this is way more wording than I ever want to have on a PowerPoint presentation. But this is also going to be published on the website. And so I'm not going to be able to be there to give the verbal discussion related to it. But in general, over the 5-year period, the collections that the city of Kalispell has received from property taxes have averaged 4%. And that 4% equals any tax increase plus the amount of new growth. So we are restricted by that 1/2 the rate of inflation. And this is the perfect graphic that explains it. We do not, just because you received a letter that says your house increased in valuation by 40%, we do not collect 40% in additional taxes. We are restricted by that 1/2 the rate of inflation and new growth. Those two factors combined over the last 5 years have been on average 4% a year. If you look at the consumer price index over that same time period, it has averaged 4% a year. So right now, in a vacuum, if everything just followed the consumer price index, we'd only be able to stay at status quo, despite all the new growth that's occurring. Because that new growth basically is protecting us from the 1/2 the rate of inflation starvation diet. So again, in a vacuum, we'd be just keeping up status quo. But in reality, our actual inflationary costs for labor and supplies has been 6% a year over that same time period. So in all actuality, we're falling behind from a property tax perspective. And so the immediate question is, well, how does that factor? How do we adjust? Things like new revenue sources. We talked about the marijuana funding straight into the general fund that helps account for some of that we're following behind on. So anytime we have those issues, the Southside Tax Increment Finance District sunsetted, created new growth revenue that came in that has helped us with that. Without those new revenue sources, we'd be laying people off. So we are following behind in terms of property tax keeping up with actual inflation. So the other question we get is, well, just, make do with what you have and cut in other places where you can. So this is our general fund budget, where police, fire, and our transfer to the ambulance occurs out of. That occurs out of the fire department budget. So this year, 74% of our general fund dollars go to police and fire and ambulance. So 74%, I think it's like around $11 million out of our $15 million budget. Throw in the support with municipal court and the attorney, and you're up to 82%. And you're getting into that $13 million range. So we could do away with the rest of the general fund and still not meet the recommendations of the CPSM report. I would still argue probably want to have an HR department. That's usually a good thing. The general government, you can't get rid of it because that is our property insurance, our liability insurance, which again supports police and fire. We'll just skip over the value of the city manager. I think that will kind of substantiate. But then you can see you just can't cut to make those recommendations work of the needs that were identified in the CPSM reports.
So, I mean, they're good questions, it's never a problem with anyone asking, but when you actually visualize, boy, it's actually a fairly lean operation with the majority of the funding going to public safety.
Doug,
And that's not unusual amongst really any municipality with police and fire. That is where the bulk of funding goes. So even though, we will spend 2 slides and a bulk of time talking about this, really our focus that we want people to take away is, the levy itself and what it provides. And that is where, we end with $82.22 in annual taxes per $100,000 of assessed home valuation. That's what the cost is proposed. But that provides, again, the 2 detectives and a crime analyst and 1 to 2 additional officers on the street for every shift for law enforcement. For fire and ambulance, again, you're looking at, additional fire engines and additional ambulance, both fully staffed as unique, but also potentially able to provide a variety of deployment components. And then the additional fire station off of Farm to Market Road. Again, we've had that for a long time when it was platted out, but that, provides the ability to cut down on response times for that geographic area of town. So as we culminate, the main message, we really try to keep it as simple as we could by focusing, again, 2 main messages: increasing call volumes and increasing response times. And again, our goal is for the community to become educated and to speak of what they want for their service delivery. And I'm really appreciative of, the council being able to provide us with funding to go out to do some of these things. We had produced this report and then had a graphic designer make mine look a lot better than the initial one that was prepared.
You did a really nice job.
Yeah, yeah. No, I was quite satisfied with my initial, and this looks a whole lot wbetter than mine did. But what's also going to be used is for our additional themes. We're going to have a postcard mailer go out here at the beginning of end of January, beginning of February. Probably have a couple of them. Use the same theme, stay consistent. Use the same symbolism. Just try and keep everything in a consistent fashion. The audio. I should say the. Video advertisements playing on the theater, again, same messaging. And we'll try and use that same voiceover for potential radio spots. The videos that some have participated in already in creation on the council level, again, using the same themes that we're looking at and really focusing on education and the community having that say in where they're going. And we'll, make all those consistent across those lines. So if you haven't shot a video and still want to, let me know. We can get you set up for that.
Did Eric make us look good?
Well, I tell you, 4 years ago, he made me look good on the one I did 4 years ago. So I'm pretty sure that's possible. He can make everyone look good. So that's our presentation. I'll also throw up the video that we have playing right now in the theater. But I don't know if anyone had any questions on the presentation. It's been a very unique and engaging process because, again, we probably have 12 to 14 people on this committee, and it's all give and take. If you had each one of us design our own messaging and our own, graphics, they'd probably all be different. So it's kind of a nice collective effort where we have to, forego our own visions of perfect to go with that collective, and probably coming out with a much better product because of that, because we're all stepping back.
What's the average home valuation? Isn't it around 600,000?
So the school district used 450,000.
Okay.
So, that's what we put on the ballot. So when you look at the ballot, in the language that the council identified, we used 100,000 and 200,000 because that's requirement in state law. And then we added in that 450,000 just to try and keep consistent with the school district levy. So it wasn't, that was time it was 500. Whether or not 450 is the exact average. And again, the county assessed valuation is probably lower than what they could sell on the market for. That's just the valuation process. So we encourage, and we'll have that in the FAQ, show a sign on a snippet of where you can find your residential valuation
on the county tax bill and then apply that 82-22 and its proportion related to it.
Doug,
Yes.
will you be doing this presentation tomorrow at the Unwind?
I will be doing this presentation at the Unwind, then the next morning at Flathead Area Young Professionals, Rotary, I'll be doing it at the Chamber board meeting, and then the Chamber luncheon. So we actually already have it set up to get a pretty good disbursement. Again, we'll record it as well. It's probably being recorded right now. But we'll give it, a fuller presentation and have it online as well. Probably, post it on social media accounts. So yeah, this is our primary one that
Good.
we want to stay consistent with, and the messaging speaks for itself. So yeah,
It's very well done.
that's
Thank
the
you.
basis. And like I say, give a lot of credit. Give a lot of credit to our clerk communications manager. Amy has done a tremendous amount of work on this. In all honesty, when we passed it, I think in November or whatever, it's like 5 months out. It goes incredibly quick as we're putting these things together. And I'm just gonna say, Amy has stayed on top of everything and been even like 2 steps in advance of where we should be. So just
job,
a plug for Amy's work on that.
Yeah, I just want to say, I think it's, actually probably fortunate that we didn't get anyone to respond to our request, because I think you guys are doing a really nice job with it, and we're probably getting more for our money doing it in-house than had we contracted it out. And so I think it's actually really worked out well.
Yeah, and I would agree. And actually, one of the members of the committee said that on Wednesday. And, that's kind of working out well. And some things we're able to act in a much quicker fashion as well. For example, we did a voiceover on the video playing in the theaters just today, I think. And it's already been produced and sent over because there was just one wording was kind of wrong. It repeated call volumes twice instead of adding in response times. I thought, we should probably correct that. By having it in-house, we're able to respond much quicker with, the contractor we use for the videoing, but it's provided a lot of flexibility. So I really appreciate the intuition on that, because we've kind of thought the same thing. And yeah, we've just been able to really maximize available dollars. It's taken a lot of time, but again, it's a big deal and it's worth it for the municipal services. So I do want to play the video just because I think it came out really well. And again, the more we can get it out in the public eye, the better. So we'll see if we can get this going.
Exit out of your presentation, probably.
Oh,
The City of Kalispell.
Shout out to Skyvault Media for producing the video for us.
Nice.
Scott, oh, is that Clint?
oh, there we go. I'm getting there. Okay.
Kalispell is calling for community action this March. We're proposing a dedicated emergency responder levy in a special mail-in election aiming to significantly improve our emergency response capabilities. Recent reports reveal a rise in emergency calls and response times that exceed national benchmarks. This levy is our response to these growing demands as we seek to enhance our police, fire, and ambulance services with additional officers and firefighter paramedics. Your voice matters. Registered voters in Kalispell will receive a ballot this March to vote on the levy. This is your opportunity to have a voice in our emergency response delivery. For more information, visit kalispell.com or follow us on social media. Don't forget, register to vote and return your ballot by March 19th. Paid for by the City of Kalispell.
So who's talking?
One more time.
You want to hear it again?
I do.
Yeah.
The City of
Pierce.
Kalispell is calling for community action this March. We're proposing a dedicated emergency responder levy in a special mail-in election aiming to significantly improve our emergency response capabilities. Recent reports reveal a rise in emergency calls and response times that exceed national benchmarks. This levy is our response to these growing demands as we seek to enhance our police, fire, and ambulance services with additional officers and firefighter paramedics. Your voice matters. Registered voters in Kalispell will receive a ballot this March to vote on the levy. This is your opportunity to have a voice in our emergency response delivery. For more information, visit kalispell.com or follow us on social media. Don't forget, register to vote and return your ballot by March 19th. Paid for
great.
by the City of Kalispell.
Good job.
Yeah.
So, a couple other things, just as we address some of the things that we've been doing. You heard that paid for by the City of Kalispell. Amy's got us registered as incidental committee. Is that what it's called? So we're in a whole new world, and my arena is not being an elected official or going through an election of filing these things. And I was like, we're educating people. We're gonna do that. Again, Amy's keeping us legal. So you'll see, paid for by the City of Kalispell and all these things that get produced and mailed out. And, I'm signed up as our treasurer, so it'll put my name on there as well. I'm sure you guys are well familiar with it. New world to me. But again, Amy's been on top of all those things to keep us in line with where we need to be from a legal standpoint. And like I say, we'll hit the unwind tomorrow. Multiple other presentations. Flyer that'll be produced. Again, it's built off images within the PowerPoint slide. Will go out as well towards the end of the month. And then we'll have handouts as well. So probably have radio spots, I think. And I don't know, did we find out that, can we just use the voiceover that Dan produced? Okay, so that's what we're working on, just because that hits everything we're talking about. And, on the radio, it still hits the message even without the visuals. So really trying to, again, just focus on getting the message out to the community. Talk to the Interlake. We'll be meeting with the editorial board towards the end of the month here. Be some advertisements that go out. Again, just want to make sure that the community is aware that this is before them. Hopefully get educated. And again, they participate in the level of services they want for their community. So just wanted to go over those materials. And if there's any questions, happy to answer them. But that's just kind of what I wanted to present tonight.
Already scanned the QR code. Works.
Goes straight to the thing.
Yeah.
And we're still fleshing that out. Like I say, we want to get a frequently asked questions up there that, we've already got partially drafted. Because there's a lot of questions that emerge and want to send people back to, especially as it talks about valuations and the formula for creating your valuation and some of those different efforts. So, so good. Glad to see that it does what it's supposed to.
I think one of the things that this makes really evident is, as I've often said, because of the tax structure in Montana, with half the average 3-year rate of inflation, if you're not growing as a community, over time you offer less and less and less services. So this really kind of brings that home to roost. And I just want to make sure that citizens understand that, because we've seen a lot of growth, and because of that growth, we've been able to keep up with what we have for infrastructure. But it's a double-edged sword. Same time, we now have to expand. We just don't have the revenue sources, so we do have to find a way to pay for it. Doug, can I plug in, because I think I can hit this.
Yeah, what
Do you
are
have
these?
a USB-C? So I've talked about inflation, right? And I think I've heard the administration say something lately about, well, what worry? Inflation's down. It's at 2%. So let me see if I can do this. Screen mirroring. I think I'm ready.
I'm sure hoping that everything's appropriate.
It should all be.
Throwing me off here.
I'm not going to promise anything.
This may
If
be-
one of my buddies sends me a text, it's not going to be seen. So, so if we look at inflation right now, Trueflation's a website. They track about 1,000 data points real time. Inflation right now is tracking about 2%. Sounds pretty innocuous. And if you look back, understand inflation is the year-over-year change in price. Disinflation is the slowing down of the rate of inflation. Deflation is the actual decrease in price levels. So what I want to make sure we understand is, yes, 2% doesn't sound too bad. But let's look at what's happened over the last year.
Is your mic on, Mark?
Yeah, it's here. Over the last year, it's up 22%. 2 years, look at how it's climbed. 3 years.
I
So
don't
if
know
we
if y'all can
look
feel
at-
it, but I can feel it.
If you look at that increase, this is what we're fighting. All that great free money that the Fed put out, the government put out, we're paying the price for it. So as we look at it, I just want to make sure people understand, well, inflation's only 2%, everything's back to normal. No. You're still paying about 25% more for any item, or let's round it 20%. I'll give you the benefit of the doubt. So what cost you $100 3 years ago now cost you $120. How many people have gone out to eat dinner lately?
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, don't go through McDonald's and expect to get through for less than $10. Used to be $5. So I just like to point this out because as we look at this levy, this is what we're fighting. And dare I say, I don't know if I want to see deflation because that can become a worse economic animal than inflation.
Yeah, you have to go through a lot of when you inflate, you get short-term gains and then long-term problems. When you deflate, you have the problems up front, and then it gets better over time. So I just don't see any elected official doing that intentionally. It'll be at the cost of his own career. So.
They're all worried about the next election. They like
Exactly.
the stock tips. So anyway, I just wanted to share that because I talk about it, but I've finally found a way to show it.
I think we just saw, as well as it relates to public safety levies, Great Falls went out for one in November. Helena is going out for one, I think, in June. Missoula had it on the ballot. I think they took it off last November with the plan on putting it back on in 2024. Bozeman and Billings have just gone through public safety levies for various items as well. So it's not just Kalispell.
Yeah.
This is a byproduct of the system in Montana. And, not to harbor the narrative coming out of the state, but I mean, there's a letter to the editor today that talked about spending at the local level. Again, 4% in total of, on average, tax collections a year. And only, I pulled up my tax bills online. Over a 7-year period, it has averaged increase for the total tax bill that I've received, stayed in the same house that whole time, so the only changes are just the natural evolution, averaged 2% a year. So we are below the rate of inflation for what our overall tax bill is. And so this narrative of runaway spending is just erroneous from what the reality of it is. And that's why we see, the need for municipalities to go out for dedicated levies under this fashion. So sorry, didn't mean to jump in.
Oh, no, it's anytime you want to call out lying politicians, I'm with you.
Good job, Doug.
I just said the narrative was erroneous.
Oh, I'll call it what it is. Okay. Anything else on the levy? Any public comment? I think the only thing I want to do is acknowledge that we do have, is a Boy Scout, correct? You want to tell us who you are?
My name is Henry Kramer. I'm from Troop 1901. And I'm here for my citizenship in the community.
Great.
Awesome.
Well, Henry, welcome. We wish more Boy Scouts would show up. We actually wish more people would just show up, but we're really glad you showed up.
I don't know where they are.
So anyway, I wanted to acknowledge, I appreciate you coming. So you come anytime, we don't bite. Well, some might, but just stay away from Sid.
Hey, I was a Boy Scout. Come on.
City manager report.
Yeah, just a couple items. We've hit a lot of the levy stuff that I'm gonna let everyone be aware of. I've talked a lot about the House Bill 355. We'll be meeting with the county and the health department on regional opioid districting, potential to access an additional pool of funds related to the opioid settlements that are outside of our distributions. And they have to create a whole governance structure for that. So I think we're meeting this week to kind of identify what that even looks like very early on in the process. But again, I think there was an article a week ago or so about all these unspent opioid funds. It's because everyone's putting these governance structures together. So we'll be Flathead County's spearheading that, so appreciate their efforts on it. Then just, and I shudder to do it, but interim committees are meeting. So they're special committees looking at tax increment financing, round 2 of the governor's housing task force, and now governor's task force on property taxes. So keep you apprised of what and how those are looking as we head into the next legislative session. And that's all I have, Your Honor.
Okay. We'll be closed Monday.
And we'll be closed Monday. So our work session will be, or our regular meeting will be on Tuesday. Thanks.
Yeah, we've had one 5-day week that we need another 3-day weekend. Anything from council? No. Mr. Graham?
Thank you, Your Honor. Last week I was going to have some public comment, and it was a little taken back and wanted to take the week to reflect on it a little bit. But it was going to be in response to, your comment, Councilman Hunter, about, which I appreciated, about, the work that our work on this council has done for stabilizing housing prices and creating inventory. And I spent a lot of time thinking about it. It got, it was in the paper, and I read it in the paper. What I wanted to kind of do is, first off, point out why that is happening. I think there's a couple of big items as to why we're having that effect. One of them is the planning for the transportation plan to allow for future growth. We had went through and we passed that. We reduced regulatory barriers to entry, which would be the impact fees. And I think one of the big things about it is that this council also recognizes the benefit of market filtering, which is that tier effect where there's mobility within housing, where people can move from one type of housing to another if you have it provided, if it's created. And I was just kind of taken back by your comment about, that it's our work as the council, because you voted against a lot of things. And where I'm going with it is, like, if this council had taken the lead on that, we wouldn't have that. And so I really want to go through and try to, like, encourage, because you've got your 4 new terms, get more of that participation on that, because it's kind of like, the way I look at it is it's kind of like Sid voting no on the funding of the trail and then showing up for the ribbon cutting. It was kind of like, okay, that's all cool and everything, but where I'm going with it is, there was 2,600, well, there was 1,050 units in the 4 years that you voted no on. That's 2,600 people. That's 10% of the population at Kalispell. And I don't care that you voted no on it. I really don't. But I think that the heavy lift was done by a majority of the council, because a lot of these votes that we took had a pretty big toll on us when it comes, like, say, the impact fee vote. and some of the subdivisions that we went through and voted on, you know, they kind of had a cost to them. And the reason why it's a big deal to me is because I look at the numbers as 2,600 people, and furthermore, what we've done, we've probably set the record for probably in the next 10 years for growth. I look at these numbers as people, and the reason why I like that is because I look at it as all of our kids being able to stay here. 2,600 family, or 2,600 people that are families that, because of the actions of this council, are going to go through and have, 1,050 units because we did that. So I kind of took exception to that. Maybe I shouldn't have, but I wanted to bring it out here and kind of and put it out there and tell you that I really welcome more of it. And I don't care that you vote no on this stuff. You have your reasons. It's fine. But I think that the majority of the heavy lifting was done by a majority of the council, because the big parts of it were the impact fee. The impact fee reduction was the big part of it. And I went back and watched the meeting, and I think that at one time you did think that reducing the impact fee would go through and spur more types of a certain type of housing, which was the tiny homes. Because you made an amendment to go through and reduce that 50% so we could get more tiny homes. So I think in some capacity, there is an acknowledgement that the reduction of impact fees goes and is kind of the engine that went through and continued this through the high inflation time and, well, even now with the high inflation. So I'm sure you have a response.
Yes,
but
definitely. You shouldn't take an exception. If you look at my votes in the 4 years on term, I probably voted with 98, 99% of all the development projects that have come through here with the majority of the council. I don't know what the number is, but I voted for almost all of them. I mean, there is, honestly, there are a few that I've opposed, but so that's number one. And two, when there's been opposition in the audience to some projects, and I've spoken out very vocally about the importance in increasing supply, about the need to allow for the new development, I've pushed probably more than anybody on the council about density, talking about trying to get that mix of housing in developments, asking for multifamily in those developments that come before us, and it's all single family. And I've spoken out against that, trying to get more density for that supply. I've been probably the loudest voice on that on this council. Not only that, but I have proposed a number of measures to get deed restricted affordable housing to try to get those units that people can't afford when they can't afford market rate housing. I've pushed for using city-owned property to develop some of that. I've pushed for zoning reform to get more infill development in existing neighborhoods with higher density. I've pushed for, I've suggested a housing trust fund. All those things you all have opposed me on. So to sit here and say that somehow I'm hypocritical because
no, I did not say that. I was not going there with it.
Okay, well, either way, it's a fairly blunt attack on me, saying that I can't sit here and appreciate the fact that we have approved law units and that has had an effect, which I have been saying for 4 years is the case, that supply is absolutely part of the equation, and I've been part of that solution. So the fact that I do have some standards that I don't think that we should compromise on our riparian buffers, our wetland buffers when we have developments, but I want higher density. If we did some of the things I proposed, some of the developments where I called for higher density, when I've encouraged developers, bring us higher density, and some of the other proposals, we'd probably have more units than just the units that I voted against. So I don't accept your critique at all.
But that's where I come in with the market filtering aspect of it, where the market filtering comes in. You have to, and it's a debate, and we don't need to debate it now, but
I accept market filtering, but there's still going to be the lower tier folks who will not be able to afford market rate housing, no matter what, even with market filtering.
well, it's obviously it's a much larger deal than what we'd be able to talk about now, but I just was thinking that, you know, a lot of the main item things that went through, because a lot of the things, like, let's say some of the stuff that we did went through and allowed those projects to come even before us because they penciled out. That's all I'm saying. So that's what I'm saying.
I mean, we have a difference of opinion on the impact fees, for sure. I just don't see the evidence that was a major factor in that. But I've spoken repeatedly on that topic.
No.
Okay. You two guys go at it all the time. with the impact fees. Over time, we might come out with something. You never know.
Huh?
Over time, we might come out with something, you know, that works. Mr. Dowd.
I feel like I get my 2 cents in here too. Well, I was cool not to say anything until my name got brought up. But anyway, so I did.
I wouldn't have it any other way.
I did vote for the Parkline Trail. I voted against going over budget to finish it. So I just want to clarify that. No hard feelings, anybody. Thanks.
Actually, I don't mind these kind of, I hope the council doesn't mind it, because within the structure of a lot of things, we don't have the ability to really kind of talk about these things in the public, other than during council comments. So I'm happy to let things banter for a little bit, but I want to make sure we're not getting into a debate that really should be something noticed. So there's a fine line. But yeah, definite difference of opinion. So, anything else from council?
There's a national blood shortage, by the way.
There's a what?
National blood shortage.
Blood, okay, got it. I thought you said national flood shortage.
So did I.
National blood.
Blood, got it.
was
Okay. I'm like,
released today. So just FYI.
okay.
Thank you.
I had a number of things I was gonna tee off on tonight, from local legislators to League of Cities and Towns to everything else under the sun. But I think one of the things I want to talk about is, in the past, we have done council forums with elected people seeking office at the state level. And I think what I would like to do is, as we get towards that next election, put together a small committee off the council. What I'd like to do is come up with a series of questions for people who are running for office and talk about city issues to see, because I think there's been times in the past where some of the elected officials that represent the city, the county, and remember, we have people that represent our cities. It's not like one person represents the city. It's a bunch of pie shapes. And what I'd like to do is put together a small committee that would start working on questions, city issues through from the past legislative session, what potential issues could be coming up. Have a series of questions that we could send out to those who are running. Because I honestly think we're getting to the point where I think the council needs to come to a consensus and actually endorse candidates. And I'm not looking at party affiliation endorsements, just who do we think is going to be the best to represent the city and the citizens of the town? Because there's been times where I think that that's been severely lacking, where the party is more important than the area that the elected officials represent. So what I'm thinking on that is myself, I don't know, Carrie, if you might have an interest on that.
Yeah.
Maybe Sam, maybe you, Ryan. I'd like to work on that. Sid, I'd have you, but you're running for the Senate.
Yeah, you don't want to.
And you're the.
You don't want to cross streams.
I can't even go there with you at this point. I don't think. But I think maybe the four of us to work together and then maybe actually interview the candidates as they're going and ask the questions. But I want to, like I said, I don't want this to be a litmus test. Oh, if this, then, I mean, I don't want to do the ranking thing like the parties do that's just idiotic. What I'm looking for is just, here are issues within the city. And I'm also looking for what person seeking that higher office actually believes the best government is that's closest to the people. Not removed in the halls in Helena or in the halls in Washington, D.C. But as I keep thinking over the last session, I think that this is one of those items, and I don't know, Mr. Russell, the city attorney might say, you can't endorse, but we can at least ask questions. We can at least get back to doing the forums, because I think it's important to at least let the candidates understand the issues ahead of time before they get corralled by the party whips in either house or either section of the Senate. And maybe have some input and representation that actually is effective for the city.
Yeah, so I'm pretty sure it's going to fall under state ethics guidelines in that you cannot use any public resources for that purpose in terms of a candidate or something like a ballot election.
Mhm.
Whereas, we can't advocate for a ballot levy. I'm pretty sure that would qualify over to a position for an elected office as well, in terms of using any type of city resources
Right.
for that. Now, it doesn't mean you can't get factual information related to it and say, hey, we support anyone that is in line with XYZ. But in terms of the advocacy for a specific position, I think that falls under the same
We'd
line
have to form a PAC.
I still don't think you can use any public
We
resources.
wouldn't use any public resources.
And that would, I'm trying to think how that would fall in line with elected officials. So like you wouldn't be able to advocate for a specific person using the platform on the dais. And so you just have to take that approach. You're all individuals with your own political feelings and the right to express those outside of your tie-in to public resources.
Okay.
I can verify that, but I'm pretty sure, because we just looked at it all just last week.
So we'll figure out the we'll
elected
figure out the
officials.
sideboards.
That would be our recommendation, is
Yeah, we'll
you fall
figure
in line with state law, please.
I would feel uncomfortable with an endorsement, but like a forum,
Something.
allowing candidates to share their views on local government and how state government can cooperate or whatever, that would be
Right.
appropriate.
Okay. But I think we should get back engaged with that. I think it's been missing.
We used to do it.
Yeah, we used to do it. And so, okay.
Mr. Jafrida back into action.
Yeah, we'll pull Phil back into action because he was always like the ringleader. Okay.
That was
And
a
with
pleasure.
that, I just want to let everyone know it's going to get really cold this week. So please be cognizant of that. I've told my kids something other than flip flops on your feet. So,
Doesn't matter.
yeah, it doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter.
Socks with their Birkenstocks, I guess. And with that, we're adjourned.